Wait, so Tova is also zoomed in or no?
I don't know. I put up the. If you want to contact Tova, let her know that the Zoom link is on. All right. Welcome to the greatest show on earth. No, I'm kidding. Chapter 3: the legal environment, equal employment opportunity, and safety. We're now in human resources, chapter 3. So we're going to discuss the legal stuff in human resources. There's a lot of it. I think much of HR revolves around legal. We'll talk about equal employment opportunity, making sure that people are not discriminated against. Everyone has an equal shot at getting a job. We're not in India per se, where they have a caste system, where if you're not in the right segment of society, you're barred from certain jobs. In America, technically, anybody and everybody has access to good jobs, whether we are from peasant stock, if you will, or whether we are from, nobility. We all have a chance of getting jobs. Now, of course, we still have the aspect of who you know, not what you know. That still exists. People definitely get hooked up at jobs, but there's legal and there's illegal. We're also going to discuss some concepts of safety. When you are employed by someone, they're responsible to provide you with a clean and safe environment. All right, so one of the learning objectives, identify the three branches of government and the role each plays in influencing the legal environment of human resource management. List the major federal laws that require equal employment opportunity and the protections provided by each of these laws. Discuss the roles, responsibilities, and requirements of the federal agencies responsible for enforcing equal employment opportunity laws. Identify the three theories of discrimination under the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and apply these theories to different discrimination situations. All right, we continue on with the next part of the learning objective. Slide number 3, identify behavior or behaviors that constitutes sexual harassment and list things that an organization can do to eliminate or minimize it. Most of you have heard my spiel on sexual harassment, either in Principles of Management or in Business Policy when I presented to you the state of New York's sexual harassment training. In this city here and statewide, all organizations are required to give sexual harassment training, prevention of sexual harassment, and that's very, very important. Discuss the legal issues involved with preferential treatment programs. Identify the major provisions of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, otherwise known as OSHA, and the rights of employees that are guaranteed by this act. OSHA is super important. Safety at work is super important. Not that I expect you to really pay attention to this, but if you look at a ladder, go to Home Depot, you look at a ladder. If you have a ladder at home and you're bored one day, there's a sticker on the side that gives you the weight limit, which basically is an OSHA regulation. So let's say I have a big guy like me climbing on a ladder, looks sturdy, all of a sudden, boom, I fall down. I'm at work, changing light bulbs, and boom, I fall down. That's an OSHA violation because OSHA requires that stickers be festooned, stuck on the sides of the ladder so that you know what it's rated for and what it could handle and what it can't handle. And that's very important. Also, like the Department of Buildings, just as an aside, they're also big into OSHA violations and safety violations. If they go on a job site, let's say they're building a high-rise somewhere in Manhattan, and they go on site and they notice people not wearing hard hats, those helmets that they have, you're gonna have a lot of problems. And the reason you're gonna have a lot of problems is because it is required to have safety goggles. It is required of every employee to have safety goggles, gloves, a hard hat in case debris falls down. Remember, the government is supposed to ensure that we are safe. Back in the day, in the early Industrial Revolution, nobody cared about safety. They didn't care about employee safety. If you, God forbid, one mangled their hand in one of the machines because they were moving so quickly, they cut their hand off or they lost fingers, well, hopefully you had enough fingers on the other hand you could do the work, or otherwise you're out of a job. There's no suing the organization. There was no disability. There was poverty and there was starvation. It was really a cruel world. So the OSHA Act of 1970 was, I guess, one of the later enactments to protect employees. And don't forget, like, even in schools, I remember when I was a school administrator, this wasn't so much an OSHA law, but I'm sure it's included in OSHA law, but they went nuts about asbestos. Anybody know what asbestos is?
Oh yeah, it's like that mold or whatever, like in the walls or
It's
something.
not mold. It is it's on the periodic table. Asbestos is a fireproof material, and it has fibers. Under a microscope, I'm not going to get too gory because I don't want anybody to get nightmares here. They look like hooks. And if you breathe them in, if one breathes them in, it lodges inside the lungs, and over time, it literally claws away at the internal tissue of the lungs. It destroys a person's lungs. It causes a disease called mesothelioma. I'm sure if you watch TV, there's a million calls, so-and-so and so-and-so. Right. A lot of people also got sick from this when they worked in the Navy Yard by ships because there's a lot of asbestos over there. Also in mechanic shops where they have poor ventilation, the brakes have asbestos on it. So also like in the public schools back in the day, they had asbestos on the ceilings. Kids would jump up into the ceiling and, kids are kids. They'd jump up and they would hit the ceiling and this white powder would come down. The Marlboro Man, the famous Marlboro Man, the guy, he also died. I probably was smoking, but also definitely asbestos exposure because when they did all the snow scenes back in the day, in the 1950s, the snow was asbestos. So they really exposed people to all kinds of crazy stuff. We are supposed to be always looking for ways of improving safety and looking out for people. I remember when I worked in the hospitals years ago, all the radiology techs, the guys that would do the x-rays, they all wore a badge. Not because they were cops or anything. Those badges actually were sensitive and would be able to pick up levels of radiation, and they would know what level of radiation each individual was exposed to. So you had a certain amount that was safe within a month. If you exceeded that, they'd have to take you out of circulation. And that badge would actually indicate whether or not you were exposed to too much radiation. The fact that you have lead suits, right? How many of you, anybody have a cavity filled lately or gone to the dentist lately? You get x-rays in the dentist. Why do they put the lead apron on you? You have any idea?
Radiation.
To protect you.
Right. And look where they're protecting your whole torso. All your internal organs, a person's reproductive systems, all protected. God forbid a person gets exposed to radiation, they become sterilized, they can get cancer, they can get all kinds of terrible things.
So
Even though the radiation that comes out of that machine is not Hiroshima and Nagasaki radiation, but it's enough that they're afraid to do that. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, so what happens to the part of the body that is exposed to it? I mean, like...
Again, it's not high levels of radiation, but they don't want bouncing rays going off the rest of your body unnecessarily. You're not supposed to get x-rays every day. You're not supposed to get CAT scans every day. Those are not good. Those are things that are not supposed to be happening. PET scans, MRIs, these are not things you're supposed to be doing every single day. Even though I think MRI don't have radiation in it, but still, it's magnetic. It's not good for you. It's not something you're supposed to have, have your broccoli, have your oatmeal and an MRI. It's not.
What about sonograms?
I don't know, but I'm not sure. But anytime you're using all those machines, you have to be very careful. And the world is all about being careful. Look at all these lawsuits.
Right now, though, like, people are polluting the world. It's like...
Pollution is not a new thing. That has been going on since the dawn, since the Industrial Revolution, even earlier than that. Just as an aside, early Mesoamerican civilizations, the ones that lived, where the Aztecs and the Incas lived, many of them died of plague because they didn't have proper garbage disposal. They would just dump garbage over the side of the mountain. And eventually, over decades and decades, that stuff would cook in the sun and cause all kinds of disease. Anyway, let's not go off the rails too much. Let's move on to the legal system in the United States. So this is kind of like the stuff that you learn in elementary school, and also if you're going for your citizenship exam. This is one of the things that they talk about. So the three branches of government: the legislative, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. I will hold back any political comments here. Executive branch, which is the president and all the regulatory agencies, and judicial branch, which is the U.S. District Courts, U.S. Courts of Appeals, and Supreme Court. Now, if you look at the notes over here on the bottom, A lot of nice, juicy notes here. Again, just the legislative branch of the federal government consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. These bodies enact laws that govern many human resource activities. The executive branch consists of the President of the United States and regulatory agencies. The President oversees. The judicial branch consists of the federal court system, which is made up of 3 levels. The first level consists of the U.S. district courts and quasi-judicial administrative agencies. Okay, we continue with the next slide. Equal employment opportunity enforced through constitutional amendments, legislation, executive orders, and court decisions. We spoke about this, if you remember, in Principles of Management and also in Business Policy. We spoke about all the different laws. So again, this part refers to the government's attempt to ensure that all individuals have an equal chance for employment regardless of race, color, religion, gender, or national origin. And Table 3.1 in the text will have a summary of a bunch of EEO laws, which is what you would see in the Principles of Management book. There's a chapter there in diversity. I think it's chapter 5 in the Jones and George book. It talks about diversity, it talks about the EEO. There's a table there, I remember, has all the Title VII, all the different laws that are out there to protect people's rights in employment. Okay, continuing. Constitutional amendments. 13th Amendment abolished slavery. So obviously slavery has been abolished. 14th Amendment provides equal protection for all citizens and requires due process in the state action. You can't just arrest somebody without due process. You have to have charges. You have to be read your rights. This is not a free-for-all. You don't got to knock in the middle of the night like the KGB or the Gestapo and they just take you away, never to be seen again. That's not the way we operate. So again, the 13th Amendment of the Constitution abolished slavery in the U.S. The Reconstruction Civil Rights Acts were attempts to further this goal. Of course, it was met with the Jim Crow laws, if you remember your history from, social studies back in high school. The Jim Crow laws were enacted to prevent blacks from voting and holding public office. Just because slavery was abolished doesn't mean that it was a bed of roses if you were black living in the South. In fact, living in the South being a black person in the South was miserable, for all intents and purposes, till the 60s, 70s, and maybe even into the 80s. There's still some racism left over. You have white supremacists there. So yes, the 13th Amendment was a big thing. It abolished the institution of slavery, but the institution of slavery lived on and continues to live on in some other countries. There are countries in Africa and other countries where slavery is practiced. I don't want to go into that and go off the rails, but slavery still does exist in different forms. 14th Amendment provides equal protection, again, and that forbids the state to take life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and prevents the states from denying the equal protection of the law. No one could just, again, take your stuff away, your house, your car. No one could just commandeer your car just because. All right, any questions? Anybody in class have a question? Any of our viewers out there in the land of cyberspace have any questions?
No questions.
No questions? You remain. Okay, good. I'm doing such a great job. Thank you very much. Okay, equal opportunity employment, slide 3 of 7. Congressional legislation, Reconstruction Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1871. Remember, America wanted to reconstruct the South. The South was destroyed. If you've ever read anything about Sherman's march on Atlanta, how he just torched the place down. A lot of hatred of the North towards the South, of course, from the South to the North. And America wanted to repatriate and kind of like reconstruct the South back to its early days. So granted all citizens the right to make, perform, modify, and terminate contracts and enjoy all benefits, terms, and conditions of the contractual relationship. It was contractual law. Equal Pay Act of 1963 requires that men and women performing equal jobs receive equal pay. Again, we also have a slide in Principles of Management that discusses this. Unfortunately, in many, many places, women and men don't get paid equally. It's gotten a lot better, but it's still not where it should be. And hopefully over time, those differences will be minimal and totally gone. Congressional legislation continued in the equal employment opportunity, slide 4 of 7. Title VII, V2, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 forbids discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. We've added to this with sexual orientation as well. People are not allowed to be discriminated against work because they're gay or lesbian or any other type that exists now, and they're more being, registered as we speak. So, Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967 prohibits discrimination in employment against individuals 40 years of age and older. But it's still alive and well, and the reason it's still alive and well is because it's very hard, unless you're a really bad hiring manager, and you make it obvious that you're doing age discrimination. But it's, unless you could prove a pattern where people discriminate. Like, I'll give you an example. We had to let someone go in my office almost 2 years ago. And I was a little bit concerned because they were in their 60s, they were right before retirement. That's not the reason we let them go. We had other reasons, which I'm not going to go into, but it required me to seek legal counsel. I reached out to my legal counsel, and we went through a whole process, and we asked, how old is she? How old is everyone else in the department? It's interesting. She was, I think, 64. Then there was somebody who was 70. And then there was somebody who was like 58. So we weren't going for the oldest. We weren't going for the youngest. In other words, if you wanted to say age discrimination, you'd have to really be able to prove it. We were able to terminate her because we had documentation. She had done certain things that we wrote her up for in the past, and currently she did something that was wrong that caused the organization problems.
What if their job prevents them? What if their age prevents them from doing their job?
Okay, so that's a great question. I'm going to just answer that question real quick. Every job has to be done. In other words, no law says that you have to hire people that can't do the job. So, for example, and this may sound like a silly example, but I'm going to use it anyway. Let's say, okay, I'm 47. I'm definitely not the skinniest guy. I'm definitely not young anymore. And if I went down to try out for the New York Yankees, I went down to wherever they are in Florida right now. They're in I don't know where they play. Anyway, whatever. And I wanted to try out for the team, and I didn't make the team. Can I sue age discrimination? Can I sue for age discrimination? No. Why? Because it's not because I'm 47 that I can't play for the New York Yankees. It's because I can't run, can't hit for my life. I can't catch a ball if it was thrown to me at 2 miles an hour, let alone at 100 miles an hour. I'm not cut out for it. It's not me. It's not my skill set. And it has nothing to do with my age. If I was 27, I still wouldn't make it. If I was 20, I still wouldn't, because that's not what I do. So when somebody's unable to do his or her job anymore, that's the issue. So there's a bona fide occupational qualification, which means that you need to have a minimum skill set to be able to do your job. No matter how old and how young you are, once a person's unable to do it, it's over. Let's say, for example, God forbid, somebody's driving for the MTA, Mass Transit Authority. They have diabetes, and it's uncontrolled, and as a result of that, they go blind, God forbid, right? And they're 60, 65, 80, 23, it doesn't matter. And then MTA says you can't drive for us anymore, you need to go on permanent disability. Is that discrimination, age discrimination? No. Can't have a blind man or woman drive a bus. That's not safe, that's not normal, that's not to be expected. So you need to have those kind of laws enacted, otherwise you'd have a free-for-all. Everybody could come in, no hands, no arms, no legs, no sight, no hearing, give me a good job. I mean, that's an extreme case, obviously, but somebody with no hands, no arms, no legs, no sight, no hearing, how could they do any job? They're severely handicapped. They're not able to do anything. A person like that is the super disabled. We have Medicaid. We have, if they have kidney issues, we got Medicare. We take care of our sick and our infirm, but we're not required to basically throw the job out the window. I hope that answered your question. Equal opportunity continued, slide 5 of 7. Congressional legislation continued. Rehabilitation Act of 1973 requires affirmative action in the employment of individuals with disabilities, making sure that people with disabilities are well represented. Vietnam-era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act of 74 requires federal contractors and subcontractors to take affirmative action toward employing Vietnam veterans. Affirmative action has been used as a catchphrase for minorities being employed, but affirmative action can be used for any group that would otherwise be discriminated against. And again, we're not getting to a full-blown discussion about affirmative action. I have spoken to minorities who have told me that they hate affirmative action. The reason they hate affirmative action is because in their eyes, they feel that it cheapens their skills. They know they have the skills and they want to get in on their own right. They don't want to get in, quote unquote, on the curve. And one minority member, who was a good friend of mine in a previous job, told me that if they have someone operating on them, they don't care what color, what creed. They want to make sure that they went to a good school and got great grades. That's all that matters to them. It doesn't nothing else matters. So again, that's a problem that unfortunately is a byproduct. Because we as a nation, we try to right the wrongs of the past, and there's a great debate of whether or not affirmative action was a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not going to take sides. I'm just pointing it out to you so they should have some information. Here's figure 3.1, age discrimination complaints from 1991 to 2014. It seems here that the most complaints existed in 2008. Again, I don't know why. Perhaps
there was the recession back in 2008.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good point. So I guess people were trying to maybe try their luck to see if they can somehow make a quick buck and sue. Yeah, there are people like that. They just love to litigate, and they just go out there and sue and sue and sue and sue. Okay, continuing on. Congressional legislation continued. Pregnancy Discrimination Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. I had such a story. I had a woman that came in for an interview. She did not look pregnant. She looked regular. And in a matter of 2 or 3 months, everyone's like, Steve, she's getting big. I'm like, okay, so you're close to her. Tell her to hit the gym. What do you want from me? I can't tell her. No, she's pregnant. I said, okay, great, mazel tov. Congratulations. What do you want from me? Well, how'd you hire someone that's pregnant? I said, I don't give pregnancy tests. Now, I've heard horror stories.
In China, they do that.
Where women went for job interviews and they were given a cup and a strip and told to go into the bathroom and test for pregnancy. Completely illegal. You're not allowed to ask questions. Are you pregnant? Do you plan on being pregnant? Do you have kids? How do you balance? That's none of your business. I don't need to know if you're married, single. Remember, all those questions are super, super taboo and you can't ask those kinds of questions. Civil Rights Act of 91 prohibits discrimination, same as Title VII. Americans with Disability Act, ADA of 1990, prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities. You have to make reasonable accommodations to people with disabilities. Here's Table 3.2, maximum punitive damages allowed under the Civil Rights Act of 91. 14 to 100 employees, if you discriminate in that kind of environment, damage limit is $50,000, and 101 to 200 is $50,000. 201 to 500 is $200,000. More than 500 employees, $300,000. Wow, that is a lot of money. Continue on, executive orders. Executive Order 11246 prohibits government contractors and subcontractors from discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. So anybody contracted or subcontracted by the government also is bound by the same laws. And by the way, they're also liable for sexual harassment. If you have a third party, we'll talk about this a little bit later on, that let's say, I don't know, situation. 2 young female nurses, and again, I'm just using this as an example. It's not the only way it can come out. 2 young female nurses sitting at the nurses station. In comes plumber from the local 123, and he starts hitting on her and saying all kinds of nasty stuff. Now, even though this plumber is from local 123 and doesn't work for the hospital is still responsible to make sure that all subcontractors and contractors get trained and know what is expected of them, and they have to protect their employees. The same will be true with the subcontractors of the government, that they also can't discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Executive Order 11478 requires the federal government to base all its employment policies on merit and fitness, and specifies that race, color, sex, religion, and national origin should not be considered. Just a little bit more on the bottom. So these executive orders are directives issued and amended unilaterally by the president to affect human resource management practices. In other words, this is a one-way street. This is the law, take it or leave it. So Executive Order 11246 requires affirmative action in hiring women and minorities. It covers federal contractors and subcontractors with contracts greater than $10,000. Just as a little bit of an aside, I used to work in a plumbing supply place many, many years ago, and my boss put his wife's name on the ownership. In other words, he made her the owner. Why? Because he wanted to have a female-owned company so he could bid on school contracts. Minority-owned companies are a hot item. Many companies will just take on a minority partner besides their business acumen, but to also have that added extra benefit of having somebody who's a minority associated with you. Right? I remember there was a big plumbing contractor owned by a female plumber. She happened to have been a licensed plumber, but it was really cool because she was able to get all these contracts because she was a female. All right, so it worked in their favor. Executive Order 11478 requires the federal government to base all its employment policies on merit and fitness, and specifies that race, color, sex, religion, and national origin should not be considered, because there was so much discrimination going on based on that, especially religion. I mean, just to talk about Jews coming over from Europe in the 1800s and 1900s, they had a major issue with religion. Besides the anti-Semitism that existed then and unfortunately exists today, they also had an issue with keeping the Sabbath, as I say, being Shomer Shabbos. In that, in America, the day of rest was Sunday, because America was then and still is, from all intents and purposes, a Christian country. Yes, various denominations, but then, so the day of rest in America, in other words, you got your day off on Sunday. Everybody was off on Sunday. Everybody worked Saturday. So if you didn't work Saturday, you'd get fired. And many people, unfortunately, could not handle the test and succumbed, and they gave up their religion, because giving up the Sabbath led to other things, and of course, eventually, all the, a lot of the intermarriage that went on, a lot of Jews lost their religion and totally melted into American society as a result of that. It wasn't, I think, until 1972 where there was an amendment passed to prevent this from happening. We, as Jews, those of us of the Jewish faith and those that follow the Jewish laws, it's a relatively new thing that we are able to keep the Sabbath and that nobody can discriminate against us based on that. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I had it happen to me. I don't want to go into this story, but I worked for a city agency, unnamed, and when I was laid off, it was mentioned to me that it was troubling to them that I was never available for meetings late in Friday afternoon, and that was not the reason I was being laid off, but it was troubling to them. It was veiled anti-Semitism, 100%, but
the government did that?
It was city government, and there was not much I could do. I would have to hire a team of lawyers. It would have. They bought me out. They gave me a buyout, and I disappeared because I figured I would have to spend 6 times as much money as they were giving me just for legal representation, and it was not a shoo-in that I would win anything. So I just decided to just leave, with my head held high and do it. But I personally felt that I was discriminated against by city government, and to this day I will not forgive them, because I feel that's so wrong, especially because the city government, they had two sides to they spoke out of both sides of their mouth. Of course you can have this. Of course. When it came time to actually, take my day off or leave early on Friday, it was a big deal. They didn't also look at the fact that I came 2 hours early every day, and that I skipped lunch almost every day. That they didn't look at. They were only looking at those things. I mean, again, racism, anti-Semitism, all those isms don't look at logical things. They just look at hatred. But I give America a lot of credit that they put all these laws in the books to prevent all people, from all races, from all religions, all ethnicities, all creeds, all orientations, to be protected equally under the law. We move on to slide 14. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, affectionately known as the EEOC, investigation and resolution, Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, information gathering, issuance of guidelines, uniform guidelines of employee selection procedures. Just a little bit of the commentary in the bottom. Equal Employment Opportunity, EEO, refers to the government's attempt to ensure that all individuals have an equal chance for employment regardless of race, color, sex, age, disability, and national origin. That is the purpose of all of these fair pay and all these other acts, to make things equal. We'll talk about the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. That's an interesting name. Congress passed the act specifying that an illegal act occurs when a discriminatory compensation decision is adopted. For example, we're going to pay young female secretaries straight out of high school minimum wage because they don't need the money. When they get married and they have a kid, we'll give them a little bit more money. That is super discriminatory. I don't want particular examples, but that is 1,000% discriminatory. If you give the young girl out of high school less money because she's not as experienced as the more mature woman with a baby, not because she's more mature and not because she has a baby, but because she has more experience, that's perfectly fine. If I have more experience than you, I deserve to get paid better than you because I know how to do the job better. If I do something better, I deserve higher pay. You pay a lot more money for a Ferrari than you do for a Chevy Nova. Okay? There's a reason for that, because you pay for what you get. But if I pay you less because you're young, you don't need the money. What do you need the money for? And I've heard that, what I need the money for? Maybe for my drugs for my mother or for my father because they're desperate and I'm working to help support them so that they can live. Or maybe I need the money because I'm on a life-saving drug that I need. Maybe. And the fact that you don't give me health insurance is not helping me but hurting me. So on top of that, you want to also kill me with not paying me fair wages. Again, I'm talking from experience. I've seen this. It's ugly. Yes, you wanted to say something. Please, let's not mention any entities here. This is going up on YouTube. I don't want to get sued. Okay?
I mean, no, I wasn't going to mention names or anything, but I do know someone who literally said they, pay people, it's okay to do that. Right?
It's absolutely not okay. All right. An employee becomes subject to the decision or an employee is affected by its application, including each time compensation is paid. So it was a law. On the bottom it says that the Congress passed the act specifying that an illegal act occurs when one, a discriminatory compensation decision adopted, an employee becomes subject to that decision, an employee is affected by its application, including each time compensation is paid. Imagine if I could pay you more, pay you less. You worked 6 hours overtime, I'm not paying you. Why? Because you're white, because you're black, because you're Jewish, because you're Asian, because you're Mexican. Imagine if I did that. That's horrible. We would be living in Sodom and Gomorrah. We would not be living in a normal society. Continuation, slide 3 of 3, Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, OFCCP, Utilization Analysis, Goals, and Timetables, Action Steps. These plans have 3 basic concepts. First, the utilization analysis, which compares the race, sex, and ethnic composition of the employee's workforce with that of available labor supply. Second, the employer must develop specific goals and timetables for achieving the balance in workforce concerning these characteristics. Third, employers with a federal context must develop a list of action steps they will take toward attaining the goals to reduce underutilization. In other words, if you are sued for not hiring women, or they're going to come down and they're going to make sure that you have the right balance. Now, I will say one thing. I am very blessed that where I work, the only people that are underrepresented are men. I am the minority there. 85% of my workforce are female, and there is representation of literally every type of person within the neighborhood that we are in. Orthodox Jews, not Orthodox Jews, Russian Jews, non-Russian Jews, blacks, not just regular black. We have one guy from Ethiopia. He happens to speak Russian, which is kind of interesting. All right, we have the African American is well represented, and not just in low-level positions. They have them at high level, mid-level, all over. We have somebody from China. We have a woman from India. Okay, you name it, we have it. We're like the UN. Okay, we literally have, if somebody sued us for being racist, it would be the biggest joke. They would come in and say, "What are you talking about?" I've never seen such an eclectic group of people of different races, creeds. Everything is represented. Orientations. I mean, we had an employee who was gay. We didn't discriminate. Person did a great job. We didn't care about what they did in their private lives. That was not our concern. Remember, that's the reason we have separation of church and state, so that decisions like that don't get made. Okay, again, I'm not getting into the whole theological aspect of homosexuality. That's not the purpose of this course, and I will not go into that. My own views are my own views, and this is not the place, the forum to discuss views like that. This is just the information that we need to use for class. Just want to make sure we say that clearly. So when I post this online, no one's going to accuse me of injecting my own opinions. All right, types of discrimination, disparate treatment, treating people differently. I don't know. Let's say, this is just an example. Let's say you're a Chinese girl and you're a Haitian girl. And you come in late all the time, and she comes in late once in a while. I don't care about the fact that I'm Haitian and I like you because you're Haitian, so I let it go. I don't like Chinese people, so I write her up all the time and never write you up. That's disparate treatment. Disparate impact. Yeah, I write you up, but nothing ever happens to you. She gets fired. All right? And of course, you have to give reasonable accommodation. But let's talk about reasonable accommodation in the context of disabled person. You hire a disabled person. They come to you in HR, listen, the guy says, I can't hear so well. Can you buy me an amplified headset? Right? That's a reasonable accommodation. It'll cost a couple $100. Person with vision issues wants to have a large screen, computer screen. Reasonable. Person is severely handicapped and requires his or her job be divided up amongst 5 different coworkers. That's an unreasonable accommodation, because that means that 5 coworkers are going to get new responsibilities, not get paid more, and basically that's not fair. Again, we feel bad that you're disabled. That's not the issue, but we can't hire someone who cannot do the job, or if the only way they can do the job is if we invest an inordinate amount of money. So for example, if that person requires a ramp, and it's a building that is zoned or built after, again, I'm not a buildings guy, but there's some buildings that are grandfathered in, meaning they don't need to have a ramp. But if you look at the college here, or one on Avenue J, they have a ramp. So if somebody disabled needs to get in and there wasn't a ramp, they could require them to build a ramp, because that's a reasonable accommodation. The law actually requires it. But if, let's say, they needed some kind of crazy elevator situation, they needed their own elevator, I'm just making this up, but let's say they needed that would be an unreasonable accommodation, and no normal court, hopefully, would grant such a ridiculous request, because it's just not feasible. Remember, we don't want to drive people out of business either, so there's a delicate balance. Let me also speak about another interesting concept of discrimination. It's actually happened to me. It's kind of funny. So I went to apply for a position in a hospital. The person in charge of the organization was an Orthodox Jew, and he said to me, I can't hire you because you're Orthodox Jew. I'm like, I can't believe you just said that. That's discrimination. He goes, no, you don't understand. The position that we have available is only for weekends. It's only for Friday night through Sunday. So you have to work Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. And since you're not available because you cannot work Friday night, we can't hire you, not because you're Jewish, just because you can't work that night. And that is not discrimination. If I have a certain job and it requires certain hours, it's non-flexible, in other words, I have all my positions filled and I have that one hole and I need to fill that hole, well, guess what? I'm not discriminating against you. You want to work on Friday, you want to work on Shabbos? Okay, work. I'm not holding you back. You can't because it's your religion? Sorry, I am not refusing to hire you because you're a Shomer Shabbos Jew, or Sabbath observant Jew. I am not hiring you because you can't work Friday night. Let's say the job was Tuesday night, not Friday night, and you couldn't work Tuesday night because, I don't know, you babysit your kid then and your wife has a job and she can't be home or whatever.